A few years ago, my girlfriend, her family, and I decided to check out an abandoned church buried deep in the woods of rural Georgia. It was the kind of spot that had long since disappeared from maps, the kind of place you'd only know about through local whispers and half-remembered stories. The plan was simple: explore the eerie old building, soak in the atmosphere, and maybe have a little fun. Before we left, we coordinated with a few friends to stage a prank on her family. They were going to hide in the trees nearby and spook us with the sound of tribal drums and eerie chanting. When we arrived, the church looked every bit as unsettling as we'd imagined. Its roof sagged with age, and the surrounding trees had grown wild and unkempt, as if the forest was slowly swallowing it whole. The front doors hung loosely on their hinges, and the windows were either broken or boarded up. The air was still, heavy with the scent of decaying wood and damp leaves. We wandered around for maybe 20 minutes, peering through cracks, checking out the overgrown grave markers scattered nearby, and soaking in the deeply unsettling silence that surrounded us. Eventually, we decided to take a break and sat down on the front steps of the church. A dim, old-fashioned street lamp stood a few yards away, casting a yellowish glow that only barely reached us. The tree line loomed about 10 feet from the church steps. And beyond that line of trees, it was pitch black. Not just dark, absolutely impenetrable. No stars. No moonlight. Just a black void. Then, out of nowhere, we heard a sound. I don't know how to describe it in a way that does it justice. It wasn't like any animal I've ever heard, not a fox, not a coyote, not even a barn owl. It had the bleating quality of a goat, but it was deeper, more guttural, stretched out like a scream filled with urgency and desperation. It sounded close, too close. Right at the tree line. We couldn't see anything, but we could feel that something was just on the edge of the light, watching. Immediately, my girlfriend and I assumed it was our friends playing some variation of the prank. Maybe they'd gone off script and were using some kind of sound effect or animal call. We even started acting scared to keep the joke going for the others. But as the minutes ticked by and the sound didn't return, we started to get cold. We called out, telling them the prank had landed and they could come out now. Silence. No one answered. We waited another few minutes, joking nervously to each other that they were just trying to milk it. Eventually, we stood up and started walking down a path that led to an old baptismal font deeper in the woods. The font sat at the bottom of a shallow hill, maybe 40 or 50 yards away, and we figured our friends had regrouped down there. As we made our way into the trees, that's when we finally heard it, the drums. Followed by chanting, but it was coming from the direction of the font. They hadn't been near the church at all. They'd been down the hill the entire time. That's when it clicked. If our friends were down there, and they hadn't come up to the church yet, then what made that sound at the tree line? We hadn't seen anyone. No flashlights, no movement, not even a whisper from the underbrush. Whatever had made that noise wasn't part of the plan. It wasn't one of us. Later that night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The sound replayed in my head like a broken record, each replay sending chills down my spine. I stayed up for hours obsessively searching online, listening to recordings of animal calls from all across northern Georgia and eventually the entire southeastern United States. Nothing came close. Nothing even sounded remotely similar. To this day, I have no explanation for what we heard. My friends swear they never deviated from the plan. No one else was invited. There's never been any confession, no gotcha, no hidden speaker or prank reveal. Just that single, horrifying noise from the dark edge of the woods. It's the most disturbing, unexplainable experience of my life, and even now, if I close my eyes, I can still hear it clear as day. I honestly don't think I'll ever forget it. It was sometime around 2007 when I went on a hiking trip with a friend in the Adirondack Mountains of upstate New York. We'd planned to take on one of the tougher peaks, Santanoni, if I remember correctly, and while I was excited, I was also aware that I was nowhere near as fit or experienced as my friend. On top of that, I had a heart condition that limited my endurance. He, on the other hand, was in peak physical shape and had been hiking for years. I knew from the start I'd be trailing behind, we had reached the summit without too much trouble, but the hike back down was grueling. The trail was about 6 miles long, winding through thick woods with barely anyone else around. My friend wasn't exactly the most considerate hiking partner. Instead of adjusting his pace or checking on me now and then, he shot ahead, disappearing into the forest. Within minutes, I couldn't even see him anymore. I was completely alone. As I trudged downhill, physically drained and trying to stay focused, something strange started happening. I began to hear footsteps behind me, soft at first, but distinct. They matched my own pace exactly. At first, I thought it must be another hiker coming up from behind, maybe someone who had taken a different trail to the summit. But every time I turned around, there was no one there. The woods were empty. I kept walking, trying not to let my imagination get the best of me, but the footsteps continued. What was truly unsettling was how they seemed to stop just a moment after I did, like a half-second delay. I'd stand still, hold my breath, and listen, and the forest would fall silent, unnaturally so. The moment I started moving again, the extra footsteps would resume, always a beat behind me. It was more than just the sound. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every hair on my neck stood on end, and my skin crawled with that primal instinct that something wasn't right. I scanned the trees, the underbrush, even up in the branches, nothing. But the feeling wouldn't go away. To keep myself grounded, I started talking out loud. At one point, I even began beatboxing, just to hear something familiar, to remind myself I was still in control. The rhythm gave me something to focus on, something human in a place that suddenly didn't feel entirely real. Eventually, I reached the car. My friend was already there, sipping water like nothing had happened. I didn't mention the footsteps. What would I even say? Even now, I think about that hike more often than I'd like to admit. I wonder what would have happened if I'd stopped for too long, or if I'd ignored the sound entirely. It makes you think, how many people disappear in the woods without a trace, and how many of them heard something just like that before they vanished? Back in 1987, when I was just 10 years old, my family moved into a new house in a neighborhood I'd never known before. It was a fresh start, and I was still adjusting to all the changes. Around that time, I met a boy who would soon become my best friend. I'll call him Andrew. One Friday after school, Andrew invited me to spend the night at his house. It was early December, the kind of cold where the air feels sharp and a thin layer of snow had dusted everything just that morning. Andrew's house was a few blocks away from mine, and when I arrived, another kid we both knew from my street was there too. We kicked things off playing Nintendo, the glow from the TV flickering against the walls while the snow settled quietly outside. After some time, we moved outside to shoot some hoops in the chilly air. The game was fun at first, but as the night grew colder and the initial excitement wore off, boredom started creeping in. That's when Andrew turned to me and asked if I wanted to go see something he called the pit. I had no idea what he meant, so I asked him. He just smiled and told me to follow him. We slipped through his backyard, carefully stepping over frozen patches of grass and scattered leaves. Then, just beyond his fence, we came to this enormous abandoned rock quarry. It looked like something out of a storybook, a huge pit carved into the earth, with steep rocky walls plunging straight down. From where we stood, the drop was at least 50 feet to a flat plateau below. It was eerie but fascinating. Right under our feet, near the edge, there was a cave entrance almost hidden by massive boulders and debris. Andrew explained that if you climbed down to the plateau, there was another cliff about 80 feet down to the quarry floor itself, but that part was only reachable from a different street. The whole place felt like a secret playground, dark and mysterious, and it quickly grabbed my imagination. We carefully climbed down into the plateau area to explore. The rocks were slippery, the cold biting at our fingers and faces. We were just taking in the strange, quiet beauty of the place when something caught our eyes. About 150 feet to our left, scaling the rock wall, was something none of us had ever seen before. We only ever called it the creature. It moved in a way that was almost human. It climbed the cliff face like a man would, using its arms and legs with purpose and strength. The creature looked to be around 4 or 5 feet tall and was completely covered in thick white fur, which made it blend almost perfectly into the snowy landscape. I later learned that during the warmer months, its fur would change to a brownish color, helping it stay camouflaged all year round. It was watching us, its glowing eyes meeting ours for just a moment, and then everything inside me screamed to run. Without thinking twice, we scrambled back up the cliffs as fast as we could, our hearts pounding so hard I thought they might burst. We didn't stop until we reached the safety of Andrew's house, and even then, none of us wanted to look back. For nearly 2 weeks after that night, I had nightmares. The creature haunted my dreams, always just out of reach, always watching. It felt like something out of a nightmare. Yet it was terrifyingly real. What made this creature even more disturbing wasn't just how it looked or moved, it was what it did. Over the years, the neighborhood had lost quite a few animals to this creature. Cats and dogs disappeared without a trace, possums were found mutilated in gruesome ways, and even deer that wandered too close to the quarry ended up as prey. I had seen the aftermath with my own eyes, broken bodies, spines ripped clean out, organs eaten. It was unlike any animal attack I had ever heard of. A few of the kids from our street had close calls too. One friend told me how it had nearly caught him when he was out exploring near the quarry alone, but somehow managed to escape. The creature's killing method was brutal and efficient. It seemed to have a strange ritual. It would rip out the spinal cord of its victims and devour their organs, leaving the rest behind. Nobody really understood why it did this, but the fact that it kept coming back for years made it a constant threat. Eventually, after several years of these terrifying encounters, the creature simply vanished. No one saw it anymore. The strange attack stopped, the animal mutilation ceased, and for a long time, the quarry remained silent and still. The sense of danger slowly faded from our lives. Even now, decades later, I still think about that night and the creature from the quarry. It remains the scariest thing I've ever experienced. Over the years, I've tried to figure out what it might have been. I've read books, watched documentaries, and recently, I've dived into the world of cryptids, mysterious creatures that some people believe exist but science hasn't proven. The closest thing I've found is the legend of the dog man, a creature said to be part man and part canine. But the creature we saw didn't fit that description well. It wasn't tall enough to be a dog man, and it moved on all fours rather than upright. Its fur changed color with the seasons, which didn't quite match the stories of other cryptids I've come across. I don't have answers, and maybe I never will. But the memory of that cold December night, the way it climbed those rocky walls, and the way it looked at us, that image has stayed with me, vivid and unsettling. Sometimes, when I'm near quiet forests or abandoned places, I wonder if it's still out there, lurking just beyond sight, waiting for the next unwary soul to wander too close to the pit. While it's not exactly deep wilderness, there's a place in southeastern Alaska called Dyea that has an eerie, tucked-away charm. It's situated in a small, secluded bay near the beginning of the historic Chilkoot Trail. On one side, it borders the ocean, on the other, a winding river snakes along the edge. The area is framed by steep, rugged mountains and dense, coastal forest typical of the Pacific Northwest. Nestled in this dramatic setting lies the remnants of what was once a thriving boomtown. Dyea sprang up quickly during the Klondike Gold Rush, serving as a supply hub for prospectors attempting to cross the pass on foot. But after a railroad was constructed through nearby Skagway, the need for Dyea vanished almost overnight. Buildings were dismantled and moved down the coast to Skagway, where the town was reassembled. Today, all that remains of Dyea are some overgrown dirt roads, depressions in the earth where structures once stood, and a single false front from an old building, a ghost of its former self. Quite literally, if you wander farther south into the tidal flats, you'll notice stands of short, thick Sitka spruce trees, sharp and bristly. They don't grow tall enough to block out the light, but they form dense clusters you can easily lose someone in. These forests have slowly reclaimed the land over the past century after much of it was clear-cut during the town's brief existence. It's easy to imagine how one could end up just a few feet from a bear and never realize it until it's too late. I learned that the hard way when our mischievous husky vanished into the spruce thickets and managed to avoid us for nearly half an hour. The farther you go toward the ocean, the more the trees give way to wild native grasses. Head north, and the forest thickens again, tall trees and older growth. That's where the heart of the old town lies, hidden beneath layers of moss, time, and silence. While it's not exactly deep wilderness, there's a place in southeastern Alaska called Dyea that has an eerie, tucked-away charm. It's situated in a small, secluded bay near the beginning of the historic Chilkoot Trail. On one side, it borders the ocean, on the other, a winding river snakes along the edge. The area is framed by steep, rugged mountains and dense, coastal forest typical of the Pacific Northwest. Nestled in this dramatic setting lies the remnants of what was once a thriving boomtown. Dyea sprang up quickly during the Klondike Gold Rush, serving as a supply hub for prospectors attempting to cross the pass on foot. But after a railroad was constructed through nearby Skagway, the need for Dyea vanished almost overnight. Buildings were dismantled and moved down the coast to Skagway, where the town was reassembled. Today, all that remains of Dyea are some overgrown dirt roads, depressions in the earth where structures once stood, and a single false front from an old building, a ghost of its former self, quite literally. If you wander farther south into the tidal flats, you'll notice stands of short, thick Sitka spruce trees, sharp and bristly. They don't grow tall enough to block out the light, but they form dense clusters you can easily lose someone in. These forests have slowly reclaimed the land over the past century after much of it was clear-cut during the town's brief existence. It's easy to imagine how one could end up just a few feet from a bear and never realize it until it's too late. I learned that the hard way when our mischievous husky vanished into the spruce thickets and managed to avoid us for nearly half an hour. The farther you go toward the ocean, the more the trees give way to wild native grasses. Head north, and the forest thickens again, tall trees and older growth. That's where the heart of the old town lies, hidden beneath layers of moss, time, and silence. Once there, I could follow the water back north to the truck. So I pushed forward, determined to keep a straight path through the thick underbrush. After a while, I suddenly emerged, not at the river or the forest edge, but onto the tidal flats. My heart sank. I'd gone south, the complete opposite direction I needed. I was crushed. Not only had I gotten lost, but now I had to go back through the woods that had terrified me in the first place. Oddly, the overwhelming dread had lifted a little, and at least I knew where I was now. I'd spent enough time around the flats to navigate better there. I remembered the network of dirt roads that crisscrossed the area and aimed to reach one of them. But first, I had to carefully make my way through the dense, needle-sharp Sitka spruce thickets to get to the road. The fear of bears was now real, but honestly, I preferred that risk over whatever was in that forest. Once I found the road, I began making my way back. I didn't know what had been in the woods, but I knew with absolute certainty that I never wanted to go back to find out. The road felt safer, and the dogs started to relax, until we re-entered that same dense, shadowy forest again. The feeling returned immediately. Whatever that was, it wasn't tied just to the ghost town, it lingered deeper in the woods. The dogs slowed to a crawl and lagged behind me, no heroic instincts kicking in, just pure reluctance. I was so frightened I broke into a full sprint until I reached the truck. I jumped in, shaking, fired up the engine, and sped off, gravel flying. It didn't feel like a predator warning or the commonly reported leave now feeling people mention with cryptids like Sasquatch. It was more sinister, a gut-wrenching certainty that something malevolent was watching. I felt hunted. Back at the state campground, my husband was surprised I'd been gone so long. Funny enough, I thought I'd returned early. I didn't share the darker parts of the story, just said I'd gotten turned around. Over the years, I revisited the flats a few times, but never felt that same dread, until one trip, about 3 years later, my husband had picked up photography and wanted to visit the old cemetery north of the ghost town. The moment we turned onto that road, it hit me like a punch to the chest, that same overwhelming feeling of dread. It was as if deciding to enter that part of the forest again had triggered something. The fear came roaring back. I refused to get out of the truck. I was pressed so hard against the seat, I was almost trying to melt into it. My husband and son felt nothing unusual. They knew I was unsettled but didn't press me, and thankfully didn't stay long. I returned one last time with a friend who was visiting. The feeling was there again, fainter, but unmistakable. After that, I made a decision. I'd only pass through the forest on the way to the flats. No more wandering in. I still don't have a logical explanation. Years later, a coworker mentioned visiting the same cemetery with her children. Her oldest daughter refused to leave the car, saying the place felt evil. That random moment of validation, from a 10-year-old, no less, stuck with me. It's a long, strange story with no clear ending. I can't explain why I sometimes feel overwhelming danger while those around me are completely at ease. I've had other eerie experiences in the woods, but that place remains the only one where I've ever truly felt like I was being hunted. For nearly 2 years, I worked as a field instructor at a therapeutic wilderness program based in western North Carolina. My role involved supervising and guiding at-risk youth through extended backcountry expeditions, intense 16-day shifts spent entirely outdoors, operating around the clock. Most of our trips took us deep into the Nantahala National Forest, DuPont State Forest, and Panthertown Valley. Because the teens weren't there voluntarily, managing the risk of escape was part of our job. To prevent runaways, staff implemented certain safety measures. One of these was sleeping beneath a tarp position between the tent entrances. Staff became a literal barrier. Another routine involved what we called the boot line. At night, the kids' boots were lined up under a gear tarp. Without boots, the chances of someone successfully running off dropped considerably. One particular trip brought us to a remote area we simply called Parkway Expo, located near the Blue Ridge Parkway. The site, Wet Camp Gap, was among the most isolated spots we used. That night, I was sleeping in my usual position under the open tarp with a clear view of the boot line at the far end of camp. Part of my responsibility was to wake every few hours for a silent head count, ensuring everyone was present. At around 3 a.m., I woke for my scheduled check. Still half asleep, I flicked on my headlamp with the red filter engaged and scanned the camp. Something felt off. I looked toward the boot line, 13 pairs. It took a second for my mind to process that. There were only 12 kids. That meant an extra pair, tall, heavy men's hunting boots, was sitting at the end of the line. A chill ran through me. Staff didn't leave their boots there. As that realization sank in, I instinctively switched my headlamp to white light. The moment the beam swept over the boots, I saw the figure. A man had been standing in them the entire time, completely still, watching. As soon as the light hit him, he turned silently and disappeared into the brush. Adrenaline surged as I scrambled out of my sleeping bag and gave chase, but he was already gone. The next morning, we were packing up and preparing breakfast when 3 men walked into our campsite. It's not entirely unusual for people to pass through. Some trails cut right across the area, but these men approached from an odd direction, not on the trail. They came out of the woods at an angle that suggested they weren't just hikers. I was off to the side of camp with a co-instructor going over our daily plans when the men came within a few yards of us. All 3 were armed. They didn't speak. One of them was wearing the same boots I had seen the night before. Trying to keep things calm, I said, "You gave me a scare last night." They just stared, no words, no change in expression. I asked, "You guys okay? Need help finding the trail?" Still nothing. Their eyes stayed locked on us, unblinking. The air was heavy with tension. We didn't push the conversation. Eventually, they moved on, leaving behind a feeling I'll never forget. "Here, let me show you my map. It's already in my hand." I get up from the stump I'm sitting on and approach. The trio suddenly turns and walks on across the clearing and out of view. I was glad we were moving the opposite way and only had one more night till our pickup and transport to base camp, that final night we're all sound asleep. About 2 a.m. or so. The night is broken by a blood-curdling scream. It's my female co-instructor. She's frantically running her fingers through her hair and completely inconsolable. I get her away from the group and calmed down enough to speak. She says she woke up to what she assumed was a large spider or a mouse in her hair, but when she turned on her headlamp she was greeted by the face of the tall-booted hillbilly in night vision goggles. He'd gotten almost a full braid in before she woke up and he fled. We never saw any more of them, but she never came back for another shift either, the poor thing. A few weeks later the local SR found a woman who'd gone missing nearby. She'd been accosted by a man and tied to a tree then left there. She was found alive something like 4 days later, still bound, surrounded in Panthertown. Panthertown Valley is a special hiking and camping area within the larger Nantahala National Forest. Entirely different group. We were camped down on the valley floor, in a pine forest down from Salt Rock. This stand of trees is particularly creepy simply because it's cold and dark even on sunny days, but nights are plain eerie in there. It's getting toward bedtime, 9 p.m., and we're gathered around the fire having nightly circle. The quiet evening ritual is broken by a huge crash. It's in the direction of our bear hang where all of our food was suspended from a tree out of reach of bears and raccoons. We all boot up and run over. The bags are all laying on the ground, but no animals in sight. Had the rope snapped? No, it came untied. I joke at my group's expense about shoddy knotwork. They resecure the setup and we return to camp and settle into bed, about midnight. Bam! The bags have fallen again. Now I'm mad. I don't like waking up to rehang food because of something as preventable as a second botched knot. I just wake up the boys. They swear they tied it right. Doesn't matter, we have to rehang it anyway. Everyone boots up and drags over. This time I'm gonna tie the damn knot. I woke a co-instructor and we searched the camp to see if another group was having trouble or if someone was nearby, but no one was around. Even more unsettling, there were no footprints in the fresh snow surrounding the camp, no sign that anyone had approached or left. On another occasion, while leading an expedition over the Devil's Elbow Trail from our main base camp toward Panthertown Valley, we decided to take a detour to visit some waterfalls. After seeing two, we were making our way through a dense patch of briars and brambles, struggling to find a third. Suddenly, the thick brush gave way to an open, overgrown grassy clearing, and right in the middle stood an old, rusted Ferris wheel. It was relatively small, about 30 feet tall, and clearly designed for young children. The metal was corroded and sun-bleached, with tall grass growing thickly around its base. We stood there silently, trying to process what we were seeing. There was no logical reason for something like that to be in the middle of this wilderness. Someone had carried it in, piece by piece, and put it together there. But why? That question lingered with us long after we left the clearing.